All right, so to our remote locations, shout out across the board to the rest of the group that's out there and everybody. So I know I've called out Atlanta, I know I've called out Canada. I think if I haven't yet, I should definitely have called out Belgium, our crew over in Asia. I'm going to call out one person by name. So Scott Moss, definitely hello to you out in the Atlanta group out there. So where we're at right now is, first off, for the folks here in Irving, reminder, if you're going to be in the drawing that we're doing for the MMS badge out of the Irving location, you need to have your business card put in the fishbowl between now and the Q&A session, which is going to be coming up in a little bit. All right, so reminder on that. Let's see. So to Amelia, do we have giveaways that we're doing right now?
We do. We have signed copies of several of the System Center Unleashed books. So,
excellent.
Carrie, you want to come on over? Yeah, we'll have Carrie. If you want to meet Carrie after I call out the ticket, you can meet her outside at our booth and have her sign your book. So.
All right, one second. So anybody who is outside right now, we are drawing, so you may want to keep an ear out and make sure that you've got your numbers available.
Okay. Okay, so I'm going to call out 5 numbers. The first one's 209 212.
All right.
209 212. All right. What about 209 198? Anybody? 209 198. Okay. 209 106. All right, I'll just keep pulling some numbers.
Oh, we got one going? All right, so we got one so far at least. That's good. Got to start going.
Okay, cool.
All right, and again, to anybody who's outside, we are drawing right now for free stuff.
Oh, well, yeah. Oh, great, perfect. All right, do you guys want to head outside? If you want to, just head over to the Catapult booth out in the hallway if we call your number, and you can meet with Carrie and pick up your copy of the book. The next number is 208 972. 208 972.
Anybody?
We got
one?
We have a winner?
All right, excellent.
Woo,
we got a
all right.
second. Excellent.
Go ahead and meet them outside.
Go ahead and follow them outside. If you just drew a winning ticket, follow Carrie and the gentleman we're just heading out right now.
Okay. We'll also do 209 013. 209 013. Anybody? You know, you can also just pretend you won. That's also an option. Just jump up and claim it.
Who wants to pretend? Who wants to claim? All right, get up. There you go. Hold on. I saw this guy right here. Just a second. Hold on. And we'll see who. Well, we got to have a new ticket because he had that one. So let's see who got this one. Hold on.
Okay. So first to have it or pretend they did wins it. 209 655.
Woohoo! I see this dude right here, up front. Excellent. How many more do we have?
I think we've got one more.
All right. So we got to see who's got this random number that's being drawn. What do we got?
209 074.
That dude right there had his hand up front before it even got called. He was psychic. He's in. He's the man. That's over.
Great. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Good job, everybody. Excellent. All right. So, again, to everybody on our live feeds and the rest of it, thank you all for hanging with us throughout the day. Hopefully you have been having a good time with this. Hopefully you're enjoying what you've seen so far and learning some good stuff. What I can tell you is that our next speaker is somebody that you do not want to miss. So if you're interested in what System Center does, if you're interested in what Orchestrator does, this is a session that you're not going to want to miss. So first off, I get to make an announcement, which I thought is pretty cool. So for those of y'all who don't know, or all y'all who don't know, so I blog on SystemCenterCentral.com. It's the website where I actually do most of my technical postings at. And System Center Central is actually run by Pete Zerger, who's in the audience today and will be your speaker here in a couple minutes. So Pete actually was nice enough to let me make the announcement for the fact that the brand new, completely rewritten version of System Center Central will be coming up this weekend or before. So completely code rewritten, whole new design and all the rest of it. I've been taking a look at it before it comes out. It looks really good. So that's one announcement that could hit the Twitter feeds at this point in time. Brand new System Center Central coming effective this weekend. So now with that, it's time for me to introduce Mr. Pete Zerger. So Pete needs to come on up here. I'm going to throw him under a couple of quick buses here. So first off, Pete is a cloud and data center specialist MVP. So part of the same group that I'm part of as well, who report under Travis. Pete has been a great sport as we have been making jest of him throughout the day. For those who are following the social media feeds, comparing him to Jeff Goldblum, and I'm not sure who all else, but y'all can see kind of the whole Jeff Goldblum look here. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Mr. Pete Zerger. So, kicking.
Thank you, Mr. Fuller. I'm used to being made fun of. You guys can bring it. So I've already had warnings of hecklers. Shout out to everybody out there in the ATL and APAC in Belgium. You guys are great sports. I know it's late. I think right now it's something like 4:30 in the morning in APAC, so I don't know how many people are actually awake and watching over there. I'm guessing Ray might be over there. So a lot of great sessions today. You had a couple of pretty deep dives. It's always cool to hear Wally talk. I think Travis kind of set my brain on fire with service manager reporting, and I figured being the guy, driving the caboose here, that you might be burned out on some of the deep tech. So I'm going to switch gears on you a little bit, and we'll talk. I'm going to, I guess, begin by telling you what I'm not going to talk about. I know some of you out there were here last year, and you've probably made some strides with Orchestrator. Some of you, may be brand new. So I'm not going to talk to you about how to build runbooks. I'm going to talk to you about how to be a better orchestrator. I'm going to give you some information that I hope in the next hour you can assimilate and go back to your organizations and really use it to exhibit some thought leadership in helping your organizations approach Orchestrator with a fresh mindset. And if you're an expert, I hope I give you some new ideas, some new techniques that will help you. You'll be a bit more effective in how you approach the Orchestrator component when you're working in your enterprise. So let's start with an intro. How we doing, Hal? How we doing, Hal?
Good evening. Everything's running smoothly, and you?
Well, everything is running smoothly, Hal. I'm in the center. So let me just take a poll out there of those of you that are with me. How many of you would consider yourselves Orchestrator experts? So don't be shy. Give me a show of hands. Okay. How many of you have built a few runbooks, maybe, done a virtual lab? Give me a show of hands. All right, and so how many of you are newborn babes that have never cracked the runbook designer console? That's what I'm talking about. You're my people here today. So I don't care if you've been using it for 15 months or 15 minutes. I hope to leave you with at least one thing before you walk out the door that will help you be more effective as you approach Orchestrator in your organization. So I named this session 2013 an Orchestration Odyssey for a very good reason. So if you go to the dictionary, an Odyssey is described as a long and arduous journey with often many reversals in fortune. Some good, some bad. It's also described as an intellectual or spiritual journey. Now, if Orchestrator is a spiritual journey for you, I'll say that it's okay to like Orchestrator, just don't like Orchestrator. But that question comes up, where do we begin? And an Odyssey is only effective if we're running in the right direction. And I will say I've seen some organizations do great thing with Orchestrator, and I've seen a couple of fantastic disasters. And you don't want to be the one that wakes up and pops out of that rabbit hole and says, I knew I should have turned left at Albuquerque. And if you don't understand that reference, shut up. So let's start with just maybe a reset on our frame of mind. So we're all familiar with the people, process, technology triangle, right? And as IT people, a lot of times we're focused on being as strong as we can be in the technology and automating to the maximum degree the law will allow, right? And to be really effective with Orchestrator in your environment, I think it takes just a reset on how we approach it. So we want to go from this to this. I want to think about the technology as a secondary component that's going to support my primary focus, which are the processes that I'm trying to automate and the people that are intertwined with those processes. The people who, there's always going to be a need for smart people with the right training sitting in the chair to hit the approve button, right? There are people that I need to notify at the right junctures to make sure that my orchestration is driving processes but not creating questions and confusions in the process. So before we even get into how do I start with Orchestrator, I want to just introduce you to a game that we play, that I play in class with some of my students when we're learning Orchestrator, some of my new team members. You remember that show, Name That Tune? Back in the 60s, so that was before I was born, incidentally. But one contestant would say, I'm going to name that tune in 5 notes, and then somebody else would say, I can name that tune in 4 notes, and whoever was lowest, they would get to go first and try to name that tune. So we play a game that we call I Can Do That in X number of activities, and we take a real problem and we try to solve it with as few activities as humanly possible to meet an effective end. So I was playing this game with a couple of guys in New York recently. We installed Orchestrator, and they said, okay, let's automate something. And I said, okay, give me a target. And they said, we want to send the alerts from SCOM, which we had just set up, we want to send those over to our ticketing system. I said, do you have System Center Service Manager? And they said, no. How many of you out there don't have System Center Service Manager as your CMDB today? So if you're not a Service Manager customer, I'm guessing that's going to be a significant minority to a small majority. And that's cool. We're going to talk about that problem here in just a little bit. So most ticketing systems, whether it's enterprise or not, have one thing in common, right? They can accept an email message in order to create a ticket. And from the crappiest SMB solution up to all of those other acronyms that compete with System Center, generally speaking, the subject line of my message is going to be the ticket title, and the description is going to be, the message body is going to be the description in the incident that I create. So what we did, I said, guys, I can do this in 2 activities. And the first of those I got from the Operations Manager Integration Pack, released by Microsoft, native 2. Hey guys, I don't think we can see my demo screen. Can you flip over to the other screen? Perfect, okay. So here in my runbook designer, over on the right-hand side, you see my activities. Some of those are standard activities that are completely product agnostic. I have quite a few System Center specific activities in the form of what we call integration packs. So with Operations Manager, that integration pack gives us a lot of options for working with the alerts that are raised by our monitoring system, and also to deal with maintenance mode, turning off monitoring at strategic junctures. So the obvious place for us to start with these guys was with the monitor alert activity. And so I drugged that out onto the palette, connected it to my SCOM server, and said, okay, what alert would you like to forward over to your ticketing system? And so they said, okay, let's start with DHCP service stopped, or logical disk free space. Frankly, I don't even remember what it was. So they gave me a target. And I said, okay, we're going to watch for new alerts with this. You can see it's pretty straightforward. I can actually add all sorts of properties from my alert and filter however I like. So we filtered on the title, pretty straightforward. One of the standard activities in Orchestrator is a send email activity. Pretty simple activity to configure. It just wants to know what SMTP server it's going to use, what's the to address, what's the from address, and give me a message. So what makes Orchestrator so powerful, though, is I don't have to hard code all of this in advance. I can configure this runbook to consume information from the previous activity in the sequence at runtime. So we do that with subscription data. So by default, every activity in this runbook is going to publish data to a shared data bus. It all runs within a Windows process. What I do here, I put some free text in there. You see I put an alert colon on the front, so when I was looking in the ticketing system, I'd have a real good idea where this came from. And then I simply right-click, and from the subscribe menu, I pick Publish Data. So what I want on the subject line of my email, which is going to become the title of my alert, was I just wanted the name of the alert. So you see from Publish Data, it's showing me all the output of Monitor Alert. I didn't do anything to put that there. It's a default behavior of Orchestrator. So I scroll down to the ends and I grab name, pick it, hit OK, and there it is. It looks kind of like a hyperlink, right? I hit the add button and I added the address of my service desk's SMTP listener. So I'm going to send that ticket over to the mailbox that it's watching or its listening agent. And the message body is simply the alert description, the details of what I want to put into that alert. So using that same publish data feature, I can go back to monitor alert and I can grab the description, which is right there. Incidentally, there are so many properties. I can, mix free text and subscription data to put additional information here. Like if I wanted to put the computer name, for example, I can put that in there, and that alert actually has a NetBIOS computer name associated with it. So I can subscribe and format until I'm happy with what it looks like. At the end of the day, I'm sending a simple HTML message. I can look at the connect option here. You see I put a mail server in there, I put an address, and you might say, I could do that with PowerShell, so what? A couple of the advantages of Orchestrator as a platform is, number one, it reduces our reliance on code. I find that Orchestrator does about 85% of what I want out of the box. The other 10 or 15%, PowerShell is my go-to guy. That's going to be how I bridge gaps quickly and easily. So I use PowerShell. I use a lot less PowerShell, so my peers can more easily support the work I'm doing. Now, technically speaking, that's all I would need to do. I can check that runbook in, start it up, it's going to monitor for those alerts, and it's going to send emails. But here's where I wanted to start getting a little bit smarter with Orchestrator and getting into the realm of what would take some effort if I was writing a script, right? So at the end of the day, one of the things I wanted to watch for is to make sure that I didn't raise the same alert twice. So I drug another activity out here from the Operations Manager integration pack called Update Alert. The Update Alert activity actually lets me go back into Operations Manager from Orchestrator and write to any property of that alert that is actually writable. So in this case, I use that same fancy subscription feature there to subscribe to the published data, and I'm actually going back to the first activity in my runbook, and I'm grabbing the ID of the alert that I would like to update. Because that's how I'm going to go find the right alert. And what I'm going to do is every alert, I know just from using Ops Manager a couple of times, has 10 custom fields there. So I decided what I'm going to do is use custom field 10, and I'm just going to stamp Scorch was here, or something like that. So I know that Orchestrator updated this. So you see here I put incident logged by Orchestrator. So now, how do I tell this runbook, I don't want you to process any alert where that field is not empty? So even if you're an experienced Orchestrator, this might be something that's new to you. So what we're doing here with this monitor alert, it's only going to trigger on new alerts, but you might accidentally go in here and check update alert. So as a bit of insurance, so to speak, what I did was on my link that connects these two activities, I added a bit of smart filtering logic. So on that link that connects the monitor alert to the email, I configured custom field 10 so we could watch for where custom field 10 matches the pattern. And you see that caret and that $sign, that's a regular expression that says beginning a string, end a string. That evaluates to null. So what I've done here effectively is said I only want you to move from monitor alert to sending the email if custom field 10 is empty, because I know I haven't touched it already with Orchestrator, so I'm not going to log a duplicate activity there. So the guys and I put this together. It took about 15 minutes, and then my biggest problem was just putting the brakes on them because this technically wasn't even in scope. I got them a little too excited, and the wheels are turning and they're ready to automate the world. So I had another request in the back of the room, strangely, right before I came up here, and I intended to show this to you anyway. because it's the #1 request I've had in the last 6 months in the Orchestrator trainings that I've delivered around the country. And somebody in the back of the room said, you know, somebody called me and said they want to monitor a mailbox for incoming messages and take, you know, some sort of action. Conveniently, that's something that's very easy to do with Orchestrator. And this particular runbook is made possible by virtue of the fact that Orchestrator has a huge user community out there with talented people that are not only building and sharing runbooks, but even building and sharing integration packs, those activities that you see over on the right-hand side of the screen. And I'm sure Microsoft will back me up here. They give you their blessing to go out and use those with some proper testing, of course, and work those into your everyday automation sequences. So I grabbed off a Codeplex an Exchange mail integration pack written by our pal Ryan up in the northern US, kind of a minor celebrity in the Orchestrator world, real talented guy. But he built what you'll see here, an activity called Monitor Mailbox. So this is a pretty intelligent activity. It has a global configuration option where I can define, global configurations are up on my options menu there. I can define the mailbox that I would like Orchestrator to watch here. So all I have to do is supply, #1, my messaging platform. So in this case, I'm using Exchange 2010. And I put a login in there, so it's going to find my primary mailbox automatically. And that last line there where you see the funky URL, that's the Exchange 2010 web service. So this is a pretty intelligent piece of automation Ryan's written here. So we're going to be watching that inbox for messages. So in my monitor mailbox activity, I have to go pick the global configuration. And in this case, I only have one. I pick that admin mailbox. You could have 2 or 3 or 5 or 50 if you wanted to, if you had enough systems out there that needed to monitor a mailbox for some reason. I really don't care why, but the capability's there. So I actually just left the defaults here, which is going to monitor the inbox. So yes, that implies that you could monitor a folder other than the inbox if you so choose. It's going to check every 60 seconds. I'm telling it that my default message format is HTML because that's what OA is in my environment. And it's going to process all the mail. Now down here in the filter tab, I went a little bit further and said, I want you to filter for emails that say run to the hills. So I'm assuming there's some sort of data center event and we better get the heck out of here. So now I'm filtering my footprint down here to very specific messages. And I could do anything I want with this within the confines of my capabilities in Orchestrator. So I decided I would log a message to the event log. Orchestrator, if you use this send event log message, it's going to log an event to the application log. I kind of use this as a testing mechanism when I'm writing my runbooks to just see what the output is of my activities to make sure I'm actually getting the data I think I'm getting. It's kind of a clever and useful little mechanism. And in this case, all I'm doing is moving the mail from the inbox over to a folder called Odyssey. Now, since we're a little short on time, I got a lot to show you and only an hour to do it. I actually ran this ahead of time so you can see what the output of this runbook is. I don't want to spend 10 minutes sending messages when we can do it. So what it does is I've got a folder there named Odyssey, and it basically just takes the messages and moves it. Now, somebody in the back of the room said, well, could I take that message and now trigger an alert in Operations Manager? If you're out there and you're the one that said that, tell me if I got that right. So I'm going to stop this runbook and I'm going to check it out. Check me out. We're going to check this runbook out, and in the Operations Manager integration pack, I have an activity called Create Alert. So playing that game, I can do this in X activities. 2 activities, baby, right there. I can go straight from Monitor Mailbox to Create Alert to Done Deal in 2 activities. No scripting required. Orchestrator, if you weren't here last year, is something you can learn in a month of Friday. So that's just a couple of pretty powerful automation sequences that you could engage in just as starting points before you even know where the heck you're going. Before you go back to your organization and you try to really lay some heavy knowledge on them, it's good to get your hands on Orchestrator, do some simple automation, take those initial steps in the journey. let's flip back to the slides, please. And just get your wits about you before you begin offering that sort of advice. Again, with the Virtual Academy, with TechNet Virtual Labs, there'll be a refresh here pretty quick. You're going to find that you can learn Orchestrator pretty well in a month of Friday afternoon. That's not something I would say to you about OpsMan, about ConfigMan, about Service Manager. I'd tell you to pack a lunch before you try to master one of those. Orchestrator, conveniently, is one of these things that connects all of these enterprise components, but it's so easy to learn. So let's have that discussion. You know, what is the optimal starting point for my organization with Orchestrator? You know, it's really going to depend on the priorities within your organization. So it's a good idea to get a read on what are the current issues that are affecting your organizations. What are the priorities? You know, what are the objectives on your scorecard for the next year? What are the objectives on your boss's scorecard for the next 12 months? You know, get some targets out there. Look around you. What are your internal support skills? You know, do you have some good PowerShell guys? Do you have, you know, a gal over in the corner that writes a lot of C#? Get a read on what what the high end of your automation capabilities are, so you know what you're going to be able to achieve as you move forward. And perhaps most importantly, talk to your service desk folks. Talk to your change manager. Look at how, incident management, change management, maybe release management, depending on if you're feeling froggy, how that works in your environment, and determine how you can, connect your runbooks over to those processes to close the loop. At the end of the day, this is going to be a heck of a lot less useful if we're out there, instrumenting vast automation sequences and we're logging nothing. That's one of the advantages of Orchestrator over scripting, is it has native logging capabilities that are very powerful. I can send an email with one activity. I can reach out to a lot of enterprise service desks with relative ease. And so you want to make sure you're thinking about doing that early in the game. So what I like to do is get everybody in a room and just look at the list of candidates for automation. And before we get into the room and we have that meeting, I send them an email. And I say, I want you to answer these questions for me and come to the meeting with a list of your top 5 to 10, okay? Do some thinking, guys. Tell me what, your personal short-term objectives are. What processes do you have that are just time-consuming and repetitive and just make you mad? Where in your service delivery process do you have sore spots where things aren't going right, things are failing frequently, maybe visible to higher ups in the organization? Nobody likes, their street cred suffering over a problem that they don't feel like they can handle. And maybe even think about this not so much in technical terms, but financial terms. What's going on out there that's costing us money today as an organization? What can I bring to the table that might add some value? And so what we do is take all of these questions and we run it through what I like to call the RBA, the Runbook Automation Reality Filter. And I've seen a lot of these lists, several dozen in the last couple of years, where everybody gets in the room and I look at the list of candidates for automation and I guess ahead of time, I know, which 2 or 3 are going to surface to the top, and I'm surprised at how many times I get that wrong. Because at the end of the day, your candidates for runbook automation are going to come down to 2 or 3 or 4 criteria. What do you have out there that is a recurring process that happens frequently? If I'm going to spend time automating something, I'm going to put priority on something that comes up 3 times a day or 5 times a week versus something that happens once a quarter. How much variance is there in the process? Is the input that I need to automate this process something that I can predict? If it's not entirely predictable, do I have a good data source where I can go to get the answer to that information? Variance is not a deal killer, but it makes automation a little bit more challenging. So variance is the second thing I like to look at. And I like to think about complexity. What is going to be required to do this? What are the interfaces on the disparate systems that I'm bringing together? Do I have native activities in Orchestrator? Can I use the run.net script activity in Orchestrator to run a little bit of PowerShell, or am I going to have to get serious? Figure that out ahead of time. And then, for those things that float to the top as high frequency, low variance, high effort, maybe add expensive on there. You know, how much money are we losing every time we have to execute that activity? Or how much are we losing every time process XYZ breaks over there in the corner? From that, you can get a pretty good idea of your direction. And remember, at the end of the day, runbook automation is designed to be easier to support than scripting. We're going to build lots of little runbooks, modular runbooks, reusable runbooks. There's an activity that my team orchestrated at customer request on Friday night in 90 minutes. And a year ago, if you'd asked me how long that would have taken, I would have told you 2 weeks, give or take. But we've made these tiny investments building little runbooks with, generally speaking, less than 10 or 15 activities. I think I can count on one hand the runbooks we have over 30 activities. Bear that in mind. Modular, reusable, function-specific runbooks. Runbooks to go look things up in Active Directory, to go find an object class, a distinguished name, to log an event if something fails. I've stumbled into some organizations that are doing great things with orchestration, and I've stumbled into a couple of fantastic failures. I spent some time with an org that was working on their private cloud, and they had developed runbook automation with Opalis. It could have just as easily been Orchestrator because the components are so very, very similar. The same for all practical purposes in this discussion. They were deploying what amounted to a service in System Center terms. They called it something else, but they were automating deployment of 2 web servers, a SQL database server. They were deploying lots of software to those servers. They were configuring the web servers to talk to the database, et cetera, et cetera. And I looked at this on the surface, you know, because they were driving it from a custom portal. I said, man, that's pretty cool. I'd love to meet your orchestrator and have him show me what he's done. And so they brought, you know, the man of the hour in the room, and he opens up a runbook that's more than 150 activities, 15 branches of logic. And I'm just floored because he's taken, you know, 75% of the benefits of runbook automation and just thrown them out the window. He's built something that's as difficult to support as any script out there. In fact, he was the only guy in the organization that really knew what was going on there. And if I mentioned the name of this company, you'd recognize him. Operationally, he had created a risk. He was deploying software by running command line commands after copying binaries off of a file share. So literally copying SQL Server down to the server doing the install. And I said, you know, you guys have Config Manager installed, don't you? Well, yeah, but I'm not the Config Manager guy. But he's on your team, right? Yeah. So that's, you know, just the perfect example of that guy that took the ball and ran with it, except he kicked it in the other team's goal. So they are in just, you know, it's a fantastic disaster from a supportability perspective. So if you go out to Bing and just search on ROI for RBA, you'll hit a blog post I did that we kind of encapsulates some of what I've shared with you here and has some links out to other resources. So some good things to think about. But now that we're getting in the right direction, how many of you out there have written a runbook that you trigger from Service Manager? So you're using Service Manager self-service portal to drive something. Is it really only 2 or 3 guys? Okay. Well, anyway, when you get to the point that you're ready to do this, and you're going to be ready to do this in the next 12 months, I'm sure of it when we're done here, I want to talk to you about how you can minimize the need to do rework in your self-service provisioning workflows. Even as you grow. Because, you know, as you saw with those initial orchestrations we did, we were looking at 2 or 3 activities, but it was pretty powerful. And you're going to make incremental improvements. You're going to come back next month and maybe add to that service desk integration, maybe some communication back to Operations Manager to fill in the ticket ID field on the alert. So maybe you kind of advance to 2-way communication in the future, and you'll want to make these modular investments. So I'm going to talk to you about moving from plain text processing. You know, you can get your Service Manager self-service portal input and you can parse it as text, but we're going to put on our big boy pants and we're going to look at XML. I'm going to show you how every one of your self-service Service Manager integrated runbook should look. They should all have exactly one input that's required by Service Manager. And incidentally, Service Manager only cares about what is the input this runbook requires in its first activity. Service Manager doesn't care what you do in activities 2 to 30. It doesn't care that your mother didn't hold you enough as a child. It just wants to know what is the input I need to pass in here. Flip over to the demo for me if you would. But basically, most of my runbooks have one input. They require the runbook activity ID. So I'm just going to jump into the portal here, and I'm not going to take you through building this runbook because that would take an hour all by itself. But I'm just going to show you the front end, what the self-service request looks like. It's actually a self-service security group request. So a user can, let me just pop back in there. The user can request access to one or more Active Directory security groups. There we go. And I even like to put approval in there. Even if a particular self-service request doesn't require approval, I like to put an approval activity into my service request, and I'll mark the approval algorithm as automatic, because someday it might not be automatic, and that means I can just go back in and I can drop whoever needs to approve this thing into the runbook. So just looking at my self-service portal here, my service request is requesting access to an Active Directory group. So you see I'm asking for a cost center here. I have a multi-select interface below here. Incidentally, I'm populating this list from my Service Manager CMDB, courtesy of the Active Directory connector. And I don't care if you have HP or CA or insert your competitor, competitive CMDB in here. You can use Orchestrator as a rich repository for driving your runbook automation. It's not a zero-sum game here. We're not asking to take over change and incident management. We're talking about kicking the training wheels off and empowering ourselves to do some very advanced automation, because the orchestration web console, as nice as it is, has very limited capability for us to offer any guidance to our end user. There's no data validation where I can, prompt them back and say, hey man, you put your email address in wrong. But Service Manager does have that capability. It has the capability to compare numeric ranges, to validate email addresses, to get into regular expression if that's where I want to go. So I ask my user for just a couple of things here. Give me your sorry, I have a little connectivity issue here. Give me your cost center, give me your department, and give me your justification. That's all I want to know. And then I'm going to kick this critter off. So I put that in, I hit the go button, and at that point my request is often submitted. Now if I go over to Service Manager, here's what I'm getting to. So I went a long way around to get to the point, and we're here. So here's a completed version of one of those service requests where this access request went through, Service Manager triggered a runbook and added this user with approval to multiple Active Directory groups. You will see down here, if I scroll down, I'm looking at service request SR447. And if I scroll down far enough, you're going to see the user input here. And you're going to see that it has fancy tags here because it's XML. So if my form has 3 questions to the user or 30, they're all going to be here. And if I can consume the user input out of this runbook activity, I have everything I need to parse that input. And if we come back 6 months from now and we want to rework this runbook to do something completely different, much fancier, etc., I don't have to change a thing in Service Manager, because all Service Manager needs to give me is the runbook activity ID. Now let me show you what we do with that. I'm going to open this service request up. We're going to go have a look at that runbook activity. And I'm going to show you the 3 activities you need to put at the beginning of every one of your Service Manager runbooks. And if you don't do this for 6 months, remember this session, come back and watch this, write this down. I need these 3 activities at the beginning of every Service Manager integrated runbook. So here it is. So there's my approval activity. I told you I like to put an approval activity there even if I set it to automatic. So I'm going to just double click on this runbook activity, and what I'm going to be looking for here is the runbook activity ID, which is a GUID actually. So I will go into this runbook activity. I'll go over to the runbook. You'll see the runbook ID is exposed here. If I scroll down under the parameter values, I can actually cut and paste the GUID right out of here, and that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to Control-C that and do a little copy. And I'm going to go up here and show you my processing user input strategy. So it requires 3 activities. The first of those is the initialize data activity. If you change the number of inputs in your initialize data activity after you've connected a runbook to Service Manager, it's going to break it. And you're going to have to go back into Service Manager and do all that work again. So the reason we're only asking for this one component for all of history is it's going to ensure I never have to go back into Service Manager and do that work. It's not complicated after you've done it a couple of times, but it's not intuitive, and nobody likes to do something over again just because, do they? So I'm going to ask for that runbook activity ID. My next activity comes out of the Service Manager integration pack. It's called getRelationship. And what I'm going to do with getRelationship here is I'm going to process the runbook activity ID that Service Manager passes when it triggers this runbook using, you got it, published data. So I'm just grabbing that runbook activity bit there. And what I'm doing is looking up the runbook automation activity and finding its related service request. Because you remember when I looked at the service request, I could see the user input, right? I could see the XML I need to parse to get something done. And so my next activity is the get object activity, and I've told it to go get the service request that is the related class, the related instance, related object, if you will, to that runbook automation activity. So you see I've set I've renamed get object to get SR, and I've set my class to service request, which you pick from an object picker that will show you every class you have in Service Manager, and I've set to where the GUID equals the related object ID from the getRelationship activity. So I gave it the GUID of my runbook automation activity, and it went and found the GUID of the service request. So now I am home free. I am ready to make it rain. So when I go into my send event log message, I basically put this here just for illustration purposes to show you what we're going to consume. What I care about from all these Service Manager integrated runbooks is this right here. I want to see this user input from get service request. It's going to send me over that XML, and now you can parse that using the XPath query activities in Orchestrator. I can execute XPath queries. Raise your hand if you're not all that familiar with XPath queries. Be honest. Yeah, that was me too 18 months ago, so I went out and did a search, and I went to w3schools.org and found a tutorial that in about 10 minutes showed me how to write XPath queries of varying levels of complexity. I'm an IT pro like most of you, not rocket science. w3schools.org, fantastic resource for HTML and all of those ridiculous little oddities of automation. So let's just test this. I actually built this just to show you these first 3 activities, just to give you a feel for what the user input looks like when we send it over. So I've launched the runbook tester here, which is a great way for me to just execute this activity. And you see there, it's asking me for the input, the same input it would ask of Service Manager. Give me your runbook activity ID. Now you remember I did a Control-C in theory, and only in theory it would seem. So I'm going to go back here and do a copy, a proper copy. And I'm going to do a proper paste. There we go. So if I run this, if I didn't make any mistakes in copying that, if I didn't get any extra characters, it's going to go find that runbook activity and then find the related service request, retrieve the user input, and log an event. Holla. Okay, so there we go, done. So let me just use the show details here. What I love about this runbook tester is I can drill down into the output of these activities. So I'm going to get down to my log entry description, and there you can see the little XML of the user inputs and what it passes in there. Let's just grab that real quick. What it brings in this XML document are the questions that we ask the user over here in the interface. So all of these questions we were asking in that Active Directory runbook activity, like give me your cost center and all that. In this XML document that I've captured, the user input, it's going to say, question, please enter your cost center, and then it's going to have answer 1,000 in quotes. So I'm going to have the entire conversation that happened between that user and service manager with very little effort on my part. But the important thing here is now I never have to change the first activity. I never have to go back and start from scratch rebuilding any of my service manager integration. It's going to be able to stand even as I add new fields to my service request, even as I rework my runbook with all sorts of new and varied and wonderful logic, right? So basically in here, well, you can see it here. You can basically see user inputs and questions and answers. I'm not going to waste too much more time on it, but you see the answer and you'll see the question. Like there it says enter justification question. So if you can parse XPath queries, which you will be able to in 15 minutes or less after w3schools.org, you're going to be good to go. Put that in your back pocket. Let's go back to the slide, please. So that's the first step. And I know you might say, we don't have service manager where I work and we can't do this, because we have a CMDB. Fact of the matter is I don't care. Again, we're going to get to that in a minute. So let's talk about integrating communication into your workflow. So, my first instinct as an IT guy is, of course, I'm going to notify somebody when the automation is done, right? So if I provision a virtual machine, I'm going to send an email to the user that says, hey man, it's ready, log in here. The fact of the matter is, you really need to vet your automation with the audience that's going to be consuming it, right? Namely the end user oftentimes, that quasi-technical person that maybe only understands a tiny fraction of the technology, and so what's obvious to you is their own private nightmare as they flounder about trying to figure out what they are supposed to do to make their request. So timing and format of your communication are actually very, very important. So if your orchestration, if your automation sequence leaves people with questions, results in phone calls to your help desk that, depending on the study you look at, cost at least $25 a pop, results in confusion at some level that has people calling you the expensive tier 3 resources, you need to rethink your approach. Because you're not saving your company money, you're costing money at that point. So we just need to refine it a bit. And I'm not saying this from a place of superiority. I'm saying this from the place of the guy who's made the mistake. Let's go back to the demo screen if we could, please. So, the target for me when I'm sitting down with a customer is, generally speaking, we march a user in the room, we put them at the console and say, provision a virtual machine. Here's your keyboard, go. And that's all we tell them, and we see if they can get there. And the fact of the matter is, if they can't get there without asking a bunch of questions, then I need to go back and kind of figure out how I can bridge that gap. And so looking at the self-service portal with Service Manager, one of the things I love about this is I can create categories with simple lists. And you see I've divided them into categories like access and security, data center and cloud services. I'm trying to create little buckets that will help my users navigate to where I want them to get. Right below the category is the service offering. So you see there access services. So in some environments, I actually wind up with a one-to-one mapping of that service offering to the request offering because that service offering needs to say request access to an Active Directory group. And then they get down here to the actual request offering and it says the very same thing. But at the end of the day, I'm trying to take a novice, a technology, limited user and make this intuitive and easy for them to consume. At the end of the day, I know I've won if I can put that user on the console and they can get to the end of this experience without having to call me to say, hey man, where's my virtual machine? So I'm going to show you a runbook that I created. This was one of my very first automations back in the Opalis, or it was Orchestrator with Service Manager in beta something, okay? It was right after they enabled this feature. Here was my runbook. Very simple. Initialize data, grab my data, and in this case, this was before I was even, executing my own one parameter only runbook. This one had a little more. I was asking for the user's email address and the name of the virtual machine they wanted to create. This was before I had kind of made the connection that runbook ID was the way I was going to go. So basically, give me your email address and your virtual machine name, and I figure they can't screw it up. And then I used an activity out of the Virtual Machine Manager integration pack. It's called Create VM from Template. So I supplied all the values here, the server we were going to deploy it to, everything I needed except that virtual machine name, which I'm consuming from the user at runtime using that published data from the subscribe to publish data menu. So I was just going and grabbing the VM name, and as you can already guess, you notice how I've color-coded my branches here. If it succeeds, that's green. If it fails, that's red. I've even changed the label on that link just by double-clicking it. I like to create a lot of visual navigation so the people that come behind me can visually look at my runbook and roughly figure out what the heck I'm doing. If I've color-coded and labeled things to a certain degree, it's not going to be rocket science for them to figure out what I'm doing. So my branches do exactly this. They look at the result of create VM from template, and if it fails, that link allows it to go down the failure branch and to send a message out to the administrator to say, hey, this failed, go check it out. On the other hand, if it succeeds, it goes down the other branch with the VM from template returning success and sends a success message out to the end user with a nice little dynamic message, an RDP to this address, et cetera, et cetera. At the end of the day, this actually failed in our first round of tests. And the reason it failed was they hit the button on the nice service manager request form. The virtual machine provisioning was in fact in progress, but I didn't communicate back to the user. So they're sitting there like the monkey at the monolith, monkeys at the monolith at the beginning of 2001. Remember, they're kind of staring up there looking at this thing. In Oklahoma, we call it like a cow staring at a new gate. They know it wasn't there yesterday. They're not quite sure, it's pretty cool, but they're not quite sure what it does. So they just kind of stand there looking at it. And that's what these users were doing. They're standing there looking at their portal and they're calling, saying, all right, it didn't work. And we're like, well, yeah, it's working. Like, no, it's not. I don't have my virtual machine. I don't know what's going on. So the fix was really quite simple. It was a matter of communication, just thinking. Have you ever had a girl break up with you and she says, it wasn't me, it wasn't you, it's me? These end users call up and they're typically apologizing in the same way. Maybe it's just me. Oh, no, they don't mean that. And your girlfriend didn't mean that either. It's you, right? so we have to take it for what it is. And I remember being pretty frustrated, but at the end of the day, what we did was actually check this runbook out. And I took that send email activity and I dropped it right here between initialize data and create VM from template. So if we actually got the input from Service Manager, we triggered an email that said, hey user, your virtual machine request is in progress. We're going to get back to you within 24 hours to say this is done. Mission accomplished. That's all it took, was one simple change on my part. So again, when we're talking about effective automation, you have to think about your audience and you want to meet them where they live. So it's not your responsibility to teach them all about virtualization. It's your responsibility to make them not care that they don't know a lot about virtualization. At the end of the day, that's what the self-service portal is all about. It's to implement our service model in an interface that anybody who can run, anybody who can log a help desk ticket can navigate, right? Easy cheesy. Let's flip back over if we could, please. So, the secret. All right, so I work in large enterprise. Cameron and I do some stuff together, and at the end of the day, there are a lot of companies out there that have some other CMDB. The fact of the matter is I couldn't care any less than I do right now. And a lot of organizations make the assumption we have another CMDB, so we can't adopt Service Manager. So how did the licensing change? It changed now to where when you own one component, you own them all, right? Because it's a single product. So you probably own Service Manager in some way, shape, or form. And the fact of the matter is, if you can give your users an intuitive self-service interface today, it could be the difference between the picture on the left and the picture on the right. And 2 years from now, after you've been leveraging service managers, CMDB, and all those connectors that populate information from Active Directory and from all your provisioning activities and all your access requests, you have a rich repository of data, and you can be selfish and you can keep it to yourself. And 2 or 3 or 4 years from now, when your organization comes back and it's time to re-up those service desk licenses for HP or CA or whatever, hey, I've got a surprise for you guys. Come check this out. Remember that self-service portal you let me put in place? Look at all the data I have for you right here. I have the last 2 or 3 years of everything we've done. I've got all of our assets out of Active Directory, out of Operations Manager, out of Config Manager, out of Virtual Machine Manager. Oh, and by the way, we put the VM management pack in, and using the Ops Manager CI connector, I put all of the VMware information in the CMDB because I could, and it makes me feel kind of cool, actually. So at the end of the day, and organizations are warming up to this. So I deal with engineers just like you every day that are frustrated by what's going on around them, and they want to they want to gain a measure of control. So a selfish deployment of Service Manager, and I don't mean a weeks long, massively planned deployment. I mean stand up a couple of VMs, get the CMDB there, get the self-service portal in place, and set up the connectors. For the love of Pete, it's going to take you a day and a half. You guys probably work in some companies that are big enough that you can probably get the SQL guys to install SQL for you, which is the piece that takes the longest, frankly. So get the CMDB in place at minimum. The service catalog comes automatically. We just have to deploy that component, and it's there. You're going to have a rich repository. Orchestrator is pretty cool. It's much more powerful, exponentially more powerful, if I have this CMDB with connectors coming from multiple System Center components, from Active Directory, from remote SQL databases, with integration packs that I get from Microsoft in all areas of my organization. And when the time comes, when the organization is ready for a license refresh, when we're ready to look at what our service desk is costing us, when we're ready to move into advanced asset management, you saw a pretty cool asset management solution on stage earlier today that is so inexpensive that it should be against the law. I love you guys. You know who I'm talking about. But let's look at what this unlocks. So one day, if we can flip back to the demo, please. One day, a guy from a government called me, and he said exactly this. He said, if you can show me X, we will adopt System Center. He said, you just need to show me one thing. And I said, okay, what is that one thing? And he gave me his self-service request, and it was somewhere between 50 and 75 lines long. I forget because I just looked at this and said, oh my God, we're never going to be able to navigate this. He said, we support hundreds of agencies, and we need to give them access to SQL databases on demand. We need to show them a list of servers, and they need to be able to pick from that server the right SQL instance, and then the database, and then they need to tell us what SQL role they need access to. And oh, by the way, you're not going to get off using the Active Directory groups that you were telling me about earlier. We're going to use SQL authentication. Wow. So at the end of the day, just leveraging the tiny investments that we've made incrementally over in Orchestrator over the last couple of years. In a long weekend, I think we started Friday night, and by late Saturday we saw the light at the end of the tunnel. By Sunday lunchtime, done deal. I've got a request for SQL database access using nothing more than the Service Manager CMDB and the SQL assets that I pulled across the Ops Manager CI connector. The SQL assets don't show up in the CMDB by default, but with one line of PowerShell, I can actually tell Service Manager, I want to whitelist the SQL database class. I want to whitelist the SQL database engine class so my SQL instances show up. And I created, with the help of my team, we created a cascading form. So it shows us the SQL servers. Now you see those refresh buttons there? That's not a limitation of what I did. That's a limitation of Service Manager because it's a web interface, right? So I pick my SQL server, I hit the refresh button down here below, and it shows me my SQL instances. And then below here, it shows my SQL databases. and I can pick my database, and then I pick my SQL role. Unfortunately, and they were actually happy. They said, just show us all of the roles that are in that database, and they said, we don't deviate from the default. So I just put a static list in here because that worked for them. And then give me the information about the user. Now, I could have captured the user input, but they said this is really important. The end user is never the person filling out this form. It's somebody in IT. So we need you to support proxy requests. So at the end of the day, just make sure that we put in here domain / username, and that'll be good enough. I can live with that. It's more work than grabbing the user token, but not challenging, to say the least. So at the end of the day, I grab all of that information. I go through a couple of screens here, first name, last name, and in this case, they wanted SQL auth, so I have to supply SQL ID. See that little red box popping up here? That's the validation of Service Manager, making sure I put the right value in the box. Big, big win for you guys if you go down the Service Manager route. Bigger win if I don't hit the caps lock key. I don't care. Everybody can put in an email address. Pick the SQL ID that you would like for this user. If they had a crazy requirement, they said, we need to be able to choose the SQL ID. Mission accomplished. What's behind this, incidentally, is a runbook that uses some native activities, what we call standard activities in Service Manager. And I'm not going to take you through the entire runbook because it's going to cross your eyes. Because what you're going to see in my runbook is a lot of child runbooks being called. I build lots of little modular runbooks so I can just pass calls out to other runbooks. If my demo cooperates here, I'll actually show you the call that I'm making here to tell you something I do. When I call a child runbook, I actually have a parent runbook parameter. So when I call the child runbook, which is this little invoke runbook activity here, when I call the child runbook, I actually pass the name of the runbook I'm calling it from, because in each of my runbooks, I log an error if it fails, and I also log the name of the runbook that triggered it. So I can, through my granular process, easily troubleshoot where my problem came from. And that, guys, is really the top of the mountain with this. It's not a zero-sum game here. Microsoft knows that you have, VMware out there in your virtualization stack. I deployed a VMware with System Center every week. That government example I just gave you deployed entirely to ESX51 with System Center 2012 CTP. Let's go back to the deck, please. So we're down to about 1 minute and 40. So fortunately, I think we're just right to the end here. So at the end of the day, guys, this is the top of the mountain, and it's so easy for you to achieve. Building those Service Manager integrated runbooks is something you can go learn on TechNet Virtual Labs. Go book a training class, get some Service Manager training. But full-blown deployment of System Center is not required. Put some seed deployments out there to populate your repository for Major League Runbook automation. Kick the training wheels off and make it happen. This can save you, with one organization, we estimated it would save them more than 2 years in developing these automation capabilities on their own using their existing CMDB. That was their figure, not mine. So, guys, why wouldn't you do that if you could do that? I mean, why?
Well, I don't think there is any question about it. It can only be attributable to human error.
It can only be attributable to human error. I love that line. I love that line. It's absolutely true, guys. So give it some thought. I hope that in the last hour, you've picked up a couple of tips, and if you're going to install Orchestrator and start running down the road, you now feel like you got a good idea for how you can run in the right direction. Pete Zerger signing off from the center.
All right, Pete, job well done. So I think we're going to get set up at this point in time to go through Q&A. So we will be doing the drawing for the MMS pass right at the end of Q&A, which I think is scheduled for a maximum of 30 minutes. That's what we're looking at. So have we got anything between now and then, or are they going to come up and set up here? What's up, Amelia?
let's go ahead and get set up for Q&A.
All right. So a couple of stats for shout outs for our folks online and the rest of it while we're getting that done. So we have had over 550 people connecting just on mobile devices today across the board in the different locations that we're at. We've synchronized up with 25 plus user groups. We've had a lot of good Q&A questions that have come through. So we hopefully got some really good stuff to be able to go through. I'll be hopefully coordinating that, so I'll get off the stage so they can do that.
In the world right now, just touched down in London town. Bet they give me a pound. Tell them put the money in my hand right now. Set up a motor, we need more seats. We just sold out all the floor seats.
Take me on a trip, I'd like to go someday. Take me to New York, I'd love to see LA. I really want to come pick it with you. You'll be my American boy. He said, hey sister, it's really, really nice to meet ya. I just met this 5'7" guy who's just my type. Like the way he's speaking, his confidence is peaking. Don't like his baggy jeans, but I'm a
We have no microphones yet, so that's one thing we'll need is any handheld mics that we're going to bring up here. If we have any handheld mics, we'll see what's going on with that here. So, yeah, we need one of those before we can do introductions. So just 1 second. All right, so when we wrap this up tonight at 6 o'clock, we'll be calling the winner for the MMS. So the MMS badge or attendance this year, as well as announcing SCU 2014 location. So if I'm going to go ahead and hand this, and if you guys would introduce yourselves, who you're with, and pass it on down the line.
Shaun Ericson with Saracen. I love long walks on the beach.
Yes, he does.
Paul Sutton from Saracen.
Going over here.
Do you really? I don't know.
Wally, Mead, Microsoft.
Travis Wright, Microsoft.
Pete Zerger, System Center Central.
Maarten Goed, I'll answer all the Dutch questions.
All right.
Jason Sandys, Catapult Systems, no Dutch for me.
Chris Ross, Catapult Systems.
Joey Snow from Microsoft, who eats barbecue until I bleed.
There you go. And Cameron Fuller, so I don't have to answer any questions. That's the benefit of actually being in my position right now. I get to determine who's the right person to answer the questions that we get thrown at us. So Amelia's got the list, so she's going to go ahead and choose. Her and Rod are going to start picking some of the questions out of this mix that we've got.
All right, so our first question is from Ted Hacker. Is there really any added value of running SCOM, et cetera, on Server 2012? It seems like doing it on SQL 2012 is more important.
Okay, so hold on, it's focusing on Server 2012 or SQL 2012?
Server
2012, all right.
If there's an added value.
All right, so let me ask, who wants that one? That's any added value? All right, all right.
Yeah, so is it important? I think the answer is it depends. I mean, obviously you're going to have a longer support horizon if you go the 2012 route. But nowadays, everybody is virtualizing SQL with pretty good reason. And when we look at 2012 as a server operating system, Hyper-V on that platform really opens up our options to scale up within a virtual machine, particularly when we're virtualizing SQL. One of the first rules of virtualizing SQL is you can't virtualize a workload that's bigger than the number of virtual CPUs you've got there. So if you're throttled at 4 vCPUs, it's going to be rough. And SQL 2012 on top of Server 2012 is going to give you best performance for big workloads and opens up those HA options. So for my money, if you're deploying System Center right now, I don't see a heck of a lot of reason to be talking anything other than Server 2012, even if this is how you're making the introduction of that platform into your organization.
Yeah. Does anybody want to add to that?
Detractors?
I'll add to it first.
Sandys wants to talk about the Metro UI.
Oh yeah, well we're gonna shut up Sandys on that one. So I'll add one other piece to that though. Also consistency. I mean, when you look at it, if you're going to deploy System Center as all the components and the rest of it, VMM only runs on Server 2012 with Service Pack 1. So if you really want consistent platform, at least from a server perspective, you really need Server 2012.
Yeah, good point. Amen.
So, anybody else? All right.
I would just add on one more thing there, which is there's really no benefit to running Ops Manager itself on Windows Server, but you get all the benefits of having Windows Server 2012, all the new features that are in there. So I think that in itself is probably the value that you're looking at.
Cool. All right. I think you're up again, Amelia. What's our next one on the list?
All right, our next question is from Bernabe Covarrubias. Can a Windows to Go on a stick be updated differentially, or does the instance have to be redeployed as the image is updated?
Okay. Windows to Go question. I won't even try to repeat that, but I think Emily or Amelia's got those spoken well. So who wants to grab that?
You need a Windows person here to answer that.
Right here.
Well, yeah, so I kind of do Windows now. So with Windows to Go, it's an operating system just like anything else. If you've got Windows, if you've got WSUS in your environment and that stick is part of your WSUS policies, it can be updated just like any other operating system. Just because it's on a USB stick, it's still a Windows device, and you treat it just the same as a Windows device. Now, if you're talking about complete rebuilding, again, I don't know what the value is in terms of doing it differentially, because it is a rather fast installation to begin with. So, I mean, applying a WIM file to a USB stick it doesn't take all that long, but you treat it just like any other desktop you treat in your environment.
All right. You cool with that, Jason? Because I saw some. All right, so that's an agreement there. Hold on, hand him the mic. You got to have the mic.
Yeah, but we don't use WSUS to update, right? We use config manager.
Sure. Whatever your solution of choice.
Offline servicing, yes.
Yes. Patching of choice. All right, excellent. All right, our third one. What do we got, Amelia?
All right. This one is for Cyrison. Give me 1 second. Okay.
Is it about walks on the beach? I hope not.
Unfortunately, it isn't. It's
Okay,
a
good.
much less exciting question, I think. Are these asset data from Configuration Manager CMDB? From your presentation in the beginning.
From the presentation you saw, it was a demo kit, so like everything else, you have a bunch of demo data to be able to show the best possible scenarios and give the best part of the solution. Generally speaking, we don't care where the data comes from. We federate from all the default connectors being AD, SCCM, SCOM. We take all that data in, and we, in the background, have a workflow synchronization process that's using the native workflow inside of the solution to then bring that data aggregated into our asset repository. To complement that, it's not our only source of truth. We have the ability to federate any external piece of data. We talked about that a little in the presentation. I think it's a key part of asset management, being able to bring in finance data, organizational data. Generally, this lives in spreadsheets that could live in fixed asset systems, but the net is it doesn't matter where it comes from. We can bring it in and have a full asset repository around that.
Well said.
Wear open-toe sandals on the beach.
All right. Go ahead, Amelia.
All right, this next question is from Dieter Wickmans. When will it be possible to exclude alerts out of notification creation in SCOM? It would be a nice feature.
Ooh, so the question is, when is it possible to be able to exclude alerts from a notification subscription? So I can answer what are the workarounds, but really the answer in terms of when that's as available as a feature would probably go right there, I would expect, to Mr. Travis.
That is not a feature on the priority list.
Not currently a priority.
Wow. Frankly.
Frankly, all right. Well, let me throw out the workaround. At least what our team works with as it stands right now is we tend to use, if you go with dynamic groups, and you can within a dynamic group you can actually exclude specific entities from a dynamic group. And this will be the third shout out for Mr. Brian Pavnik today. So he was the one who pointed out this idea. If you do it with a dynamic group, exclude the particular ones that you want to exclude, and then build your subscriptions off of that. You can work around the fact that you can't exclude out of a subscription directly. So good question.
Ready for the next one?
Take it.
Another way you could do it, sorry, just
please, go
jump
ahead.
in here, is do your notifications out of Service Manager or out of Orchestrator, because then you have more control over what gets notified.
Well said.
So he says no, and then suddenly he's really helpful.
Yeah, hold on. So no, not on the roadmap.
The question was about the feature. We're not doing the feature, but I'm a helpful guy. Yeah. And that's the reason why we're not doing the features, because there's better ways of doing it.
There's other options. Okay, I can accept that. Amelia, what do we got?
All right, our next question was retweeted a couple times throughout the day. Kid Mystic and Lee Allenberg would like to know what's going to happen with the SESM portal and Silverlight. Is there any redesign in the works?
Wow.
Have fun with that one.
Wow, hold on. So let me start. I'm not even going to answer this, but let me kind of focus this in here and the rest of it. So Silverlight is used in about 5 of the different portals in the System Center stack as it stands right now. But I will point out from today's presentations that we saw that the Azure portal is no longer running in Silverlight. So just 2 pieces of information before we even say anything. And with that, I'll kind of lean that direction towards Travis and Wally.
Did it get hot in here? Did like somebody turn off the lights or something? No, so we are looking at this, and people say, "Oh, Silverlight's dead. Why is your portal still in Silverlight?" Well, Silverlight's not dead. It's not any more dead than Flash. It's still out there. It still works just fine in most scenarios. It doesn't work on other things, but so will we build an HTML5 portal? I don't know. Probably. When? I don't know, and so I can't really say anything right now anyways, even if I did know. But it is something that we are looking at. There is a short-term plan that we're looking at. Can't share what that is right now, but it's certainly a pain point that we hear a lot from customers, and we're thinking about it.
Yeah, Surface RT. That's one of those things that
Yeah,
Silverlight
exactly.
doesn't run on.
Yeah, Surface RT.
That's painful.
Well, I don't know how painful it is yet, just since not that many. Yeah, I don't know how many people are using their RT devices to access the self-service portal right now, but yeah, that is a limitation. Yeah.
All right, Sarson.
I actually share in the sentiment of the question, but the practicality of it is that you look at an organization and interfacing with customers, they're generally doing it from their desktops, and that generally means they're running IE, and that generally means they have Silverlight in it. So I do get it because it's really cool to run on this, but I think about my mom when I talk about these things. My mom's not going to access the customer portal from this. She's going to be on her machine, on her laptop. So it's a pain point. I agree it's a pain point. I get it asked of me constantly, but I don't think it's a business critical thing where it's going to stop the deployment of the customer portal. Just to complement that from a practicality perspective.
And you're on the intranet.
Yeah.
And you are on the intranet, yes.
Well said. Good answers. All right, Amelia.
Okay, this is an Azure question from Eric Vandebrink. Is an Azure endpoint like the Joey FTP servers an IP address from Azure or an IP from one of my Office ISP?
So when we talk about endpoints, we're talking about opening up specific ports. It's not an IP to IP type of a configuration. So it's essentially like you're opening up any port on a firewall. It's essentially saying, hey, look, I want port 20 or 21 for FTP, or 20 and 21 in my case, or 1433, whatever it is. You're just punching up those ports so that you can communicate on those ports. That's kind of the whole design of the endpoint. It's not per IP address.
All right. I think that answers it. We got others left in the queue?
Oh, we sure do.
All right.
All right, here's another one we just saw from Dieter. Is there a reason to keep SCOM and SESM data WH separated now that they are using the same management packs?
Warehouse, data warehouse, I assume they're talking about. So is there a reason to separate the SCOM data warehouse and the, which was the other data warehouse, please? Service Manager data warehouse, yeah. So yeah, you want to start, where do you want to start with that one? Who wants it? I see Chris pointing at other people, which is probably a good indication who goes to Chris first.
I'm more than happy. So, basically in an ideal world, we would bring, that SCOM data and all the monitoring data behind it, into the Service Manager data warehouse to consume, out of the box. Initially, there's not a cube built, but as Travis showed today, you can easily, or somewhat easily build, a cube to consume that data and really start working with it in a unified experience. So is there a reason to keep it out versus in? I think it depends on your environment, but I'm sure there's a lot of, fodder that we could have on that.
Yeah. Well, in fact, that was something that I intended to demo here at System Center Universe, but there's just no way I could cover everything plus that in this 1 hour that I had. So look for that type of thing to be in future presentations. I plan to show how you can bring external data into the Service Manager data warehouse using some of the stuff that we saw today. And one of the first things I want to demonstrate is how you could bring Operations Manager events and performance data into the Service Manager data warehouse and cube it up. So I will do like an example of how to do that. And then we are actually making progress in that direction in terms of including more and more data from System Center into the data warehouse. In 2012, we introduced the Virtual Machine Manager connector and the Orchestrator connector, so now we're bringing even that data through into the data warehouse. We introduced the Config Manager and Ops Manager direct to data warehouse connectors in 2012. And with 2012 SP1, we introduced Chargeback, and Chargeback consumes Operations Manager performance data around virtual machine utilization. So we're actually bringing those performance data samples over into the Service Manager data warehouse and cubing that up as part of the chargeback cube so that you can get the utilization and cost basis data out of that. So we're making progress. It's just going to be one of those things where it's just going to take time to eventually get everything into the Service Manager data warehouse.
All right. Well said.
Okay. We have another question from Ted Hacker. How can we import an SNMP MIB into SCOM 2012 Service Pack 1? And are there any utilities to help build the related management pack?
I figured that one's probably going to Maarten. Here's what's going on. They're asking, in essence, it's not Dutch, but it's Ops Manager and it's SNMP related. I would think that might go to the OpsLogix person in the group here. That would be my thought, at least.
Could you repeat the question?
Can you repeat the question, please, Amelia?
Absolutely. The question is, how can we import an SNMP MIB into SCOM 2012 Service Pack 1? And are there any utilities to help build the related management pack?
Okay, so to understand the question, it's more about extending the out-of-the-box networking monitoring feature, I guess, and the models we do support out-of-the-box versus the ones we don't. To start off with, actually the ones in the product are fairly extensive, so like all the major brands and such. So what I've seen from the field is it's more or less the other models that you want to include, and then the MIB file is like a reference file on what the types of things are that you can monitor. There's no such thing like as an MIB to MP converter or like a wizard in the product to do so. But you could certainly add through the authoring piece of OM extra OIDs or other items of a network device you'd want to start monitoring. But that would be an authoring experience where you'd start adding those components, I guess.
Yep. Well said. Pretty much what we got at this point in time.
And if you want a reference, on www.authoringfriday.com, I started a blog series on how to do it if you're interested about all the tidbits.
See, I pointed to the right one, and it wasn't even a Dutch question. This time.
De blog is in Dutch, no, sorry. Ja. Het is eigenlijk heel makkelijk in het Nederlands, dan hebben we het ook in het Nederlands gehandeld.
Good to know. Yeah, that one. All right, Amelia, what's our next question not in Dutch?
All right, this question is for Chris. With Service Manager, how often do the cubes run? Does SCOM performance data from multiple MGs get passed into Service Manager for cube reporting?
Multiple management groups.
Yeah, that's a great question. So first part of that, how often do the cubes process? And it depends really on the version of SQL that you have installed. So if you're running SQL Server Standard, it's once a day. I want to say the default is like 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. If you've got Enterprise, you can do some more advanced tweaks to have it run multiple times a day. And then the second part of that question again, Amelia?
Yes. Does SCOM performance data from multiple MGs get passed into Service Manager for cube reporting?
So in essence, can you send in multiple SCOM management groups and have them report into Service Manager and be cubed for reporting?
Yeah, I don't see why not. It's just...
Multiple connectors, I assume, right?
Yep. Multiple connectors, and yeah, bring in the data warehouse. You're good to go.
All right, we got a thumbs up from Travis on that as well, so that sounds like a pretty solid answer. All right.
And enough juice to handle all that processing.
Yes.
Okay, and what Pete is saying there off mic right now is enough juice to be able to handle all that processing. So do you want to drop those numbers, or do we just want to leave it vague?
That would be a job for Server and SQL 2012.
All right, well said. Unless they throw a follow-up tweet asking details, we're going to roll on that one. All right, what's next?
All right, this one...
Hold on, let's add on to that one. Go ahead, 1 second, Amelia.
If you're using Service Manager and you're doing the data warehouse, just install Enterprise Edition and save yourself the trouble. That's all I got to say.
Well, it processes the data differently, so it's, sorry. You know, if you're processing with SQL Server Standard, it's going to process the entire cube nightly versus, what is it, incremental process in Enterprise. So that's the big difference.
And all that fancy stuff you saw from Travis's presentation with cube reporting, generally speaking, Enterprise Edition is the flavor to go. And Travis is reaching, so maybe he's going to slap me, but...
No, I would just point out that we think we fixed the issue with SQL Standard in SP1. So we think now, even with Standard, it'll do an incremental process of the cube instead of a full process.
Nice.
So I have yet to hear that be confirmed by a customer that was having that problem prior to SP1, but we did look at it and hope we fixed it.
Awesome. Excellent. All right, Amelia, what do we got?
Okay, our next question is for Wally. What do you see as the consequences consumerization and BYOD have on personal privacy and intellectual property?
Wow.
How is that a Wally question?
Wally Mead, Esquire.
Intune now part of Config Manager.
Yeah, but that still is not a Wally question or an Intune question. That's where the market's going. Certainly, you're bringing your own device in, so you have the aspect of you're putting potentially company data on that device when they access your company resources, and you're deploying potentially company-based applications out there, which are available, so not required to be put down on the device. But That's why we gave you in that Windows Intune connector the ability of putting privacy, a URL to privacy documentation on your intranet so that you can point to those people when they're enrolling where they can go to find that type of data to see what the ramifications may be. But it's purely just that. And then on the other end, like Dan was saying, that once you retire a device, we block you from running any applications or uninstall the applications that got installed from the company apps portal, so they're not available anymore. But you still have your own data there. So potential for applications getting out there, then not being able to use them anymore.
Okay.
And Jason wants to add in too.
Yeah, Jason should have been there for that one. We should have moved. All right, we got. How many more do you think we've got here? Because if possible, we may want to pull one or two out of the audience if people have ones here that they haven't tweeted in.
We've got one left if we want to take this one and then pull the audience.
That's awesome.
All right. This one just came in from Eric Vandebrink. Hosting a web server on Azure, can it connect direct from the internet, or does it connect like ISP to HQ to VPN, HQ to Azure to web server? And I'll retweet that so you can see it spelled out.
No, I mean, so there's kind of two ways to do a web server in Azure. One would be to have a web role, or actually there's three because we now have websites, Windows Azure websites. Essentially, what it sounds like here is you're asking the question particularly as it relates to having Windows Azure Virtual Networking installed. If you're accessing the web server itself and like it's a public website like joeysnow.com or whatever it is, you're going to go out through the internet for that traffic. The same thing if it was like an intranet, you would resolve to the internal network and get inside that way. So if you're running it, say, on IIS inside of Windows Azure Infrastructure as a Service or Windows Azure Virtual Machine, not that that would be really the recommended way at this point because there's other options for website hosting inside of Windows Azure. If it was an intranet and it's only internal, you're going to go through the Windows Azure Virtual Network connection. If it's an externally available one, you're just going to go out to the public internet and into Windows Azure. So that should answer that question there.
All right. Good stuff. Thank you. All right. So in the audience, unless we have anything else that just came in, so in the audience, does anybody have a barn burner question that they wanted to ask and they didn't feel either like tweeting it or hadn't gotten it in yet? No hands is okay as well. It's really hard to see up here to see if anybody does. Oh, we have one hand up. There we go. And we have one over here. So,
hi, I was wondering how Windows to Go and how Configuration Manager handles Windows to Go and bring your own device scenario when it could move from device to the device as far as inventory data.
okay, so question around Windows to Go, probably for Wally.
Well, it's just going to two ways you can handle it. You can actually have it lock out the local hard drive, so you wouldn't be able to read anything off the local hard drive. You can do that through policies with Windows to Go. So we'd just be able to do inventory off of the stick itself, and then access the rest of the resources on the computer, so the processor, et cetera. So if you're then moving that stick around to different devices, then they'll all get inventoried uniquely, and you have updated data for that. But it's just like any other device. We treat it just like a regular Windows laptop running Windows 8. Just that you can, with Windows to Go, with the group policies, you can disable the local hard drive access, so it's running all locally off the drive, the USB stick, and then whatever resource you have through the other hardware in the box.
And just to add on, by default, when you launch Windows to Go, that local hard drive is not available. So you actually have to enable that to even be seen. It's disabled by default. It's not going to see it.
Okay, well, from a licensing perspective, would it count as an additional license if you move from a machine to machine to machine from an asset?
No. Windows to Go through, and it's only an enterprise feature. It's only available through Windows 8 Enterprise. That's the license, right? It's the stick.
Okay.
So I think the big thing, maybe I didn't clarify it enough in the beginning. Windows to Go, you treat the USB stick as the device, right? That's really what it is. It doesn't really matter what it's being plugged into, so to speak. That's just the processor underneath it that's running it. But the Windows and everything else that's on it, particularly if you've got data on it or anything else, you protect that just like you would a normal PC, BitLocker it, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay.
Yeah, and for licensing, the way I treat the licensing is it's just like a DVD, a movie. You can play it on one DVD player, you can move it over to a different Blu-ray player, and you haven't violated your licensing with it. You only put it one place at a time. So same thing with your USB stick, Windows to Go.
Oh, hold on 1 second. We'll go ahead and grab just the last question here. I saw my AV guys waving, but I think we could probably get one last quick one in here a little bit over the radar screen. So last question of the night.
Yeah. Are you ever going to allow the surfacing of the alert in a distributed applications roll-up alert from the lower level monitor?
Okay, so in essence, your question you're asking is, we build the distributed application and operations manager. It has multiple disparate levels associated with it. We can generate an alert. So as an example, we're monitoring a website with a series of different web servers, and we have an error at the bottom level. We can alert off those individually at the bottom level, or we can alert off the top level the impact of the overall health state of that distributed application. But you're saying we can't alert off of, oh, I understand what you're saying now. So in essence, what you're saying is you want to alert off the top level, but you want to have the context of this is what actually caused the problem down at the bottom level associated with it.
Yes.
That's a deep ops question. So I'm seeing Pete looking like he might have an answer of some form here.
Well, so at the end of the day with a distributed application, the challenge you have there is the component groups aren't hosted by the parent. You know, it's a visual representation. So really, if you flip the alert switch to 1 at the top, you're going to open that alert and basically generate your diagram view and use the problem path to visualize where the cause is. I mean, that's my 2 cents. Does anybody else have a way to float that up?
I don't know that there is a way to float it up. I think it's against kind of the architecture of kind of how the class structure works in essence. So we've got an alert that really occurred down here that caused a problem up here. We're notifying from up here, but we don't really know the context that we came from down here. So I think it's a good question. It would be nice to have it, but I think the only viable approach that we use is to be able to get the alert, open up the distributed application, and problem path down to the root cause associated with it.
So Maarten whispered in Dutch that, you know, we might use live maps to extend that visually and maybe make that a little more obvious.
Okay, that's a good approach. So yeah, that may be a good question to field to the live maps guys and talk to them about it tonight. So, well, we have already gone over.
We've got one more question we've just got to do, though.
Okay, what's our one more question?
It's a really good one.
All right.
Okay, so it is. Oh, thank you. Thanks, Rod. Okay, from John Nelson. Do we really need to pay differently for Orchestrator depending on what it does? Our Microsoft people say we pay per client it touches.
I think that starts with Pete, maybe, or over here. You know a little bit. You want to take it? Yeah. Go ahead and hand down the mic there.
So again, you should probably contact a salesperson, the person you buy your license from. But from what I understand, the way the System Center licensing is broken up, if you buy one license of SCOM, SCSM, DPM, or Orchestrator, you then own each of those relative products. So let's say you're going for SCOM and you buy one server license. You now own one server license for DPM, SCSM, and Orchestrator. And that goes for the entire server side of it, both standard and enterprise, as well as for the CALs at the other end as well. So SCSM being the other example. Let's say I'm doing an SCSM implementation and I have 2 servers and I have 3,000 nodes. Now I own 2 server licenses and 3,000 CALs. That can be transferred over to SCOM. So it's transparent because the actual license can be duplicated across those 4, but it's only those 4. Once you step outside of that ecosystem, it then is new licensing. Again, don't quote me on that. I'm not, well, that's what I understand.
Yeah, so we were just talking about that. Do you have this one in hand, or can I? Yeah, so at the end of the day, as I understand it, and as my man to the right here said, you know, you want to, I know your name. And your love of the beach and open-toed sandals, but well, that's for another time. So as I understand it, you know, even though Orchestrator is agentless, you're going to pay for what you touch. So if I'm running, if I have a runbook that's executing and touching 30,000 desktops, I better have an ecal out there because I'm touching those nodes. If I'm playing to the letter of the law, but talk to your reps. But that's what's stuck in my head from a sticky situation a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
So let me clarify one thing on this, because this is something that people get caught up on often. There's touching directly and there's indirect touching. Ooh. This is direct touching.
Wow, that's going to be a quote. Hold on. All right.
I thought they liked that in the Netherlands, no? So if your Orchestrator runbook is directly touching a client and making that client do something, then you do need to have that client covered by an ecal. If you are running an Orchestrator runbook, which is calling into Ops Manager and triggering a runtime task that's passed down to the agent that's running on that client, you do not. That's an indirect touch. And similarly, if you're doing something through, I don't know, maybe PowerShell 3.0 or any of those sorts of things where you're like indirectly touching that client, you don't need to have. Another example would be Config Manager. Like if you call into Config Manager and say push an application to that client, that's an indirect touch. You don't have to have a license for that.
All right, hold on. Can we call her really quick because they're telling me we're way over at
You know
this point.
that agreement that you guys don't read and it's 50 pages long and says, okay, that says indirect and direct touching in there. You guys are agreeing to that on the fly.
All right. Good to know on that one. We got to let that one go for a second. Hold on, we can't let everybody leave here. So let me go ahead and close things up, wrap things up here. So first off, I wanted to do a big thank you to all of our sponsors. So to the crew at Catapult for all of their hard work to put this together. All right. To Microsoft, who we could not have done it without this event and just can't do it without Microsoft. They're awesome. All right. To the crew at Cyrison here, who have done a phenomenal job and have had a real good sense of humor as we've continued to give him grief throughout the day. He's awesome about that.
Thanks for the shout out, guys.
Yes, and the shout outs over here. To the crew at Veeam, sponsorship on that, much appreciated. There you go. 2 more.
Thank you for launch.
Yes. To OpsLogix, the crew at OpsLogix, for their assistance as well. And finally to SA Vision as our sponsors as well. So thanks to all of the above. So thank you all. All right, to our presenters, those that are up here right now, thank you all. This has been a phenomenal event. It's been really instructional, great speakers across the board today, really instructive, really dynamic, truly appreciated. So a quick round of thanks to that. All right. And of course, to everybody in the audience here on premise in the Irving location. And I'll go ahead and throw that out worldwide to the rest of our groups that are out there right now. So huge thanks across the board, worldwide attendance. So thank you. All right, I have one last thing to say before we actually shut off the live feed that we're going to be doing, which is an announcement that System Center Universe 2014 has been announced from a location perspective. Survey says, all right, Houston, Texas, 2014 will be the home for System Center Universe. So, shout out to the guys in Houston. Got a lot of people attending there this year. So, with that, we're going to go ahead and shut off the feed. And they're going to give me the, we're good there. All right, so we're shut off on the feed at this point in time. So, what we have left is the drawing associated with the MMS